what is it you do? He still doesn't understand. And I asked him the other week, I said, what is it you think I do? He said, you talk to people and have a nice cup of tea with them. That's my dad's understanding of therapy.
Dear Shandy. Welcome back to Dear Shandy, listeners. Hello, Andy.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm good. I'm very excited for today's
I know you
guest. I was just telling him before we got rolling that I spotted his book at the airport and I picked it up and I read it and I enjoyed it. So even though sometimes our Hot Topic guests get pitched to us, in this case, I sicked our team on him.
Yeah, you went out and found him.
Yeah, I went out and found him. Exactly. So our guest today is a renowned psychotherapist based in London. He has over 25 years experience in both physical and mental health and is a former National Health Services mental health clinical lead. Prior to becoming a therapist, I just have to add this because I think it's so interesting. He spent a decade working with the dying as a clinical nurse specialist in palliative care, which I think adds a dimension to his perspective. And he is the author of 10 Times Happier, the globally acclaimed and Sunday Times bestseller 10 to Zen, and most recently, How to Be Your Own sorry, I've got cobwebs. How to Be Your Own Therapist. We are so delighted to be joined today by Owen O'Kane. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I'm laughing at you choking on the word therapy. It's what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, therapy actually for me is a relatively new thing. I first started speaking with my therapist during the pandemic, I think like so many people. But just before we got rolling, you said that you feel the UK is a little behind the US in terms of the taboo around.
We're getting there. I mean, I grew up in Ireland, but I'm London based these days with work. And when I was doing this book, it was really interesting. It's my third book. And when we were kind of discussing the title and what direction we go, I had a really good idea about the concept. I said, I'd love to talk about therapy very openly. And there were all sorts of conversations about how relevant it would be. Would the word therapy put people off? Would it be distracting? And so the more, it wasn't necessarily pushback, but the more resistance I got, I thought, something, this is what I do. I wholeheartedly believe in therapy, and I wholeheartedly believe that most people can self-therapy, but they don't realize it. So why would I kind of collude with stigma and not do it? So it pushed me and it made me more determined. And I thought, no, I do believe that ultimately your goal as a therapist is to make people their own therapist. So that's the book I'm going to do. And, it was the right decision.
I love that message you have, which is you don't necessarily want your client to be completely reliant on you for life. The goal is for them to not need you one day.
Absolutely. A friend of mine's joked in London. He said to me, this book should be called How to Make Yourself Redundant. Because you're
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Do you have like therapists outside your window with pitchforks?
A few therapists have challenged me and said, people cannot do it. They can't do their own therapy. You can't tell people, but of course they can. That is the job. A good therapist will they'll want to see their client move on. I mean, I say that to every client when I finish with them. Great working with you, but I hope I don't see you again. And I mean that in the best possible way, because you don't want to see a client coming back. Now, of course, it happens and people do come back because life gets in the way and stuff happens. But I don't want clients with me for a long period of time. I work in very short-term, fixed blocks of time because I think it motivates the client to work harder.
Oh, to have a sort of light at the end of the tunnel?
Absolutely. If I say to people, yeah, just come along for 5 years, that'll be cool. It's like, no, they're not going to put the work in. They're just going to come and chill and hang out and have a chat.
Oh, that's interesting. I think, you'll get a different opinion depending on who you talk to about that. That's interesting. So before we get going, you've actually already answered my first question.
Sorry, I'm Irish. No. I talk a lot.
No, it's great. I love it when that happens. But before we get really going into the book and the concepts around the book, during my research on you, I was just totally wowed by your story. And you just have an interesting background. And I just think that it really adds dimension to your perspective, like I said.
The reality is no one has it all together. No therapist has it all together. We're all sort of works in progress. And I really do believe that to be true. And I think, look, I can put myself out there as the expert with all of the training and experience. And that's true to your point. I've got years of experience under my belt, which really serves me well. But I've also got a story that got me to where I am today. And the story actually is a huge part of why I do the work I do. You know, in a nutshell, my core story was I grew up in Belfast in Northern Ireland during a period known as the Troubles. So, you know, it's a pretty scary place to grow up. And there was a lot of trauma. And, you know, my TED talk is called Bombs, Bullets, Bullying and a Piano. So that, you know, you probably get the context. There's a lot of bombs, there's a lot of bullets. There was also a lot of bullying. You know, I was a kid who was a bit different. You know, turns out I was gay, but at the time didn't realize that. But I was playing piano, I was doing different stuff. The other kids picked up on that. So I had a pretty tough time growing up. And also, you know, I'm Irish Catholic and gay. So like, you know, there's a formula for shame in itself when you put the three together. So it was only when I left Ireland and I moved to London, and suddenly you start to find your feet and you kind of start to work out who you are. I suddenly realized, God, a lot of that was way tougher than I realized. There was a lot of fear. There was a lot of judgment. There was a lot of uncertainty. So I guess really, I often describe my background story as the best training ground for my understanding of anxiety and trauma. Because, you know, in some ways I've walked the walk. I get it. You know, I understand human struggle. So I guess really my backstory plays a big part in the work and what I do. And I use it all of the time unapologetically, because without it, I couldn't do my job.
Oh, I think that's wonderful. Really paying it forward. And I just have to touch, you just have the best accent in the world.
Oh, it's the best. It's great.
I should do commercials.
You should. You absolutely should.
My agent
ASMR, do anything.
It's funny. I lived over in Germany for a few years, and my boyfriend at the time was Scottish. And when I would go visit him in Scotland, I'd be like, oh, I want to go to Ireland. I'd never been. He's like, no, we're not going to Ireland because you're going to run away with some Irish man. You're going to like that accent way too much.
What always happens. No one leaves Ireland without running away with an Irish man.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so the idea of, I mean, can we call this self-therapy? We can, right? This would be self-therapy?
Yeah, absolutely.
What would you say the goal is? Is the goal happiness, fulfillment?
I think what I see in clinical practice all of the time, it doesn't matter who I work with. I can have a Hollywood A-lister in my office in front of me who have all of the successes and trappings in the world imaginable, you know, and they have it all. And I can have somebody else who's doing a regular everyday job. But it's the really interesting thing for me is that when you have a human being in the room in front of you, human struggle is human struggle. Mm. And I think very often what most people are trying to do is they're just kind of trying to break free of the stuff that doesn't serve them well, but they don't know how to articulate that and they don't know what that means. And I think that, you know, some people say, I just want to be happier. Some people say, I just want to be more peaceful. Some people will say, I want to understand myself a bit better. It will play out in different ways for different people. But I kind of think ultimately for me is often we can have this. One of the things I talk about in the book is we can have these kind of rehearsed narratives about what we want to be. You know, I want to be better. I want to be more successful. I want to be bigger, whatever the context might be. Mm. But often that can just be rehearsed script. And we very often don't really stop to work out, God, what is it that drives me? What is it that, you know, gives me purpose in my life? What is it that matters to me? And I don't think we stop often enough to kind of answer those questions. And I think what I try and do is I really encourage people in the book. I'm not interested in your rehearsed story or the polite version. I'm interested in the raw version of who you are and what moves you forward. I mean, look, without boring you too much with the kind of psychobabble, but, you know, we're as human beings, we're driven by three processes at any one time: threat, drive, and soothe. So threat mechanisms are very much, they're anxiety mechanisms, they're protective, they're about keeping us safe. Very, very helpful some of the time. But then when anxiety starts to raise above the parapet, it's a really uncomfortable way to live. But most of the population are in a hypervigilant, alert state a lot of the time. So that's kind of one mode of operating. The other mode is drive, where people believe that they want to be more, they should be more, they need more. So it's all of the external validation stuff. You know, I'll be happy when I get the car. Mm-hmm. I'll be happy when I get the house. I'll be happy when I'm more famous. You know, we hear it play out a million times a day on social media. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having a drive and an ambition. It's a really good, healthy thing. But when it becomes the dominant factor in your life, it's problematic. The other mechanism then is your soothing mechanism. And that's that part of you that can deal with the emotions, the part of you that can quieten the noise in your mind, the part of you that can self-regulate, the part of you that knows who you are and can self-accept. And I think most people crash land into adulthood with a highly activated threat system, a highly activated drive system, but an almost redundant soothing system. So I guess really, to answer your question in a very roundabout way, my goal as a therapist a lot of the time is to try to teach people how to activate that self-soothing system, because when they get that activated, then all of the other parts of their life tend to fall into balance.
Oh, wow.
Wow. What an answer. I love
Does that answer the question?
No.
It does. I love how you word crash land into adulthood.
Yeah.
Because when you get to adulthood, you're kind of like...
Yeah. It happens before you know what happened.
Yeah. And you're kind of eager to get there. You know, you want to get out of school, you want to make money, and you want to like see the world and do all the things and accomplish things. But you're really... And in school, you know, you study up to qualify to do all of those things, but you're emotionally... You really have very few tools.
Yeah, you're taught how to do the things, but you're not taught how to be an adult.
Absolutely. That's a great way of putting it. And it's spot on. My first therapist was in my early 20s. Now, the irony of all of this is, I'll just give you a bit of context because it still makes me laugh. I was just coming out, literally, at the time. So I'd been in a monastery for 3 years. I decided I was going to be a priest in my late teens.
Wow.
So I did that for 3 years and had the most incredible experience, you know, never regret the experience, but it's kind of where it all started off for me. And then sort of while I sort of had suspicions, but when I got to 3 years in, I thought, I'm going to have to deal with this, you know, this sexuality thing I haven't really dealt with. Long story short, I decided I wasn't going to continue on that path. I was going to come out and do different things. But I was also going to come out literally. And when I was coming out, a friend of mine at the time said, look, why don't you just go and talk to your therapist? And, you know, it'll help. And I said, I'm not really sure what I'll talk about, but I'll go. So when I get to meet my therapist, I was given an address, contacted, got a name. Her name is Kathleen. And I got a name and an address. And when I get there, I end up in a convent.
Amazing.
And I thought, why am I in a convent? I'm going to talk about being gay and stuff, and I've just left a monastery. How have I ended up in a convent? So anyway, I knock on this door, and lo and behold, a nun
is your therapist.
I thought,
you should honestly, there should be a movie of your life.
I thought, how is this going to? So I get there, and I just kind of, and she's a proper nun. I mean, lovely. She didn't have the deal and stuff, but she had the uniform.
I got bad news for you.
So the interesting thing is, I go into her, and I did a lot of, if I'm being honest, I did a lot of bullshitting at the beginning. You know, she was like, "Oh, why are you here?" And I was kind of like going around in circles and stuff, and everything was.
Oh, you know, work is hard, stressed out. All
exactly,
the time.
A bit stressed, don't like public speaking, you know, all the bullshit you can imagine. I'd come up with stories for her.
Andy loves your story.
I mean, this is like straight out of an absurdist comedy.
It really is a movie script. Sorry, continue.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, you're a comic, you love this stuff. So then she said to me, so I rambled for about 20 minutes telling her all of the things that were right with me. And she very intuitively said, she said, I noticed I've asked you a few times how you are, and you keep telling me that you're fine, you know? And I said, yeah, I'm fine. And she said, oh, that's interesting. She said, because I've done this job a long time, and I'm looking at you and I'm listening to you, and it doesn't feel to me that you're fine. It feels like you're sad. And the minute she said that, it was an interesting thing for me, actually. I could almost feel this internal, it was like a balloon bursting, you know, when you just feel like this internal deflation.
Oh, I would start bawling.
She's got me.
Yeah.
She's got me. And I could feel this lump in my throat, which I couldn't stop. And then she said, are you okay? And then suddenly I couldn't speak. And it was like, you know, this avalanche of emotion that came out and stuff. So anyway, I said, oh, there's just something I really need to talk about. Now, at this point, I hadn't come out, hadn't talked to anyone about some of the shame stuff. So anyway, I was kind of building up this, you know, big kind of coming out thing. So eventually I said to her, look, there is something. I said, you know, I think I might be gay. And she just paused and she said, oh, is that it? I said, well, yeah.
Said, pathetic.
Yeah. what a story. And she said, I thought you were going to say you'd kill someone. She said, I was like, I was waiting for, I mean, it was brilliant. It was the most cathartic thing because,
great.
I mean, I'd done all sorts of crazy stuff. I'd gone, there's a place in France called Lourdes. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah.
It's like a pilgrimage where people go to be healed. So I don't want to, and anyway, slag it off because people get a lot from faith and religion and spirituality. But I went at the time, a good Catholic boy, just before meeting the nun for therapy. I went along thinking, okay, I'll go and get cured of this. Why don't I go to Lourdes? So I go in, I queued up for about an hour to get in. I sit there and I think, okay, I would like healed of my sexuality. That would make me happy. And as I've been put into the water, all I can remember is these two French guys in these vest tops, huge big arms, huge big muscles. All I can remember are these two blokes.
It's like slow motion, like nice music.
There's
It's
something
playing.
really symbolic about that.
Oh man, that's
just
crazy.
dipping me into the water. And I can
Wow.
remember them, my head coming out again. And I remember thinking in that moment, oh my God, if I can check out a cute guy in this moment in time, there's no chance
you're
of
done
healing.
for.
And actually, the irony was, it was a big part of healing. Now, I'm talking about that because I think the whole premise of this book is about, the heart of it is often about self-acceptance, because I think often we don't like who we are. And I think often we struggle with parts of who we are. And we work really hard to push that down, and it's such an important part.
So building on that, you talk in the book about how many negative thoughts we have a day. First of all, how many thoughts we have, and then how many negative thoughts we have.
Yeah,
and it was in the 5 figures, I believe.
Well, the neuroscientists tell us that we have about 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day on average. That's kind of what they equate. Now, where it gets more troublesome is they also equate that about 60 to 70% of those thoughts are critical in nature.
Why do you think that is? Why aren't we like, instead I'll think about how great things are going for me?
Yeah, it's a good point, because I think as we've developed and the more we've moved away from simplicity, then the more anxious we've become. And of course that then evolved. And often these, what we term negative thoughts or critical thoughts, I mean, often it's a part of us. It's like a protective part that often comes out. So our mind will often produce a narrative and a story when it's in a state of threat that kind of almost like, don't do that. Guys, don't do another podcast that might fail. Don't take on this new opportunity. Our mind's always kind of constantly looking for problems, not as a means of getting in the way of our life, but a means of trying to protect us and to keep us safe or preventing harm. So instead of treating our critic as an enemy, I kind of say, no, treat it as an ally. It's a helpful force. It thinks it's doing you good. It's just got a very exaggerated response. And your job is to learn to negotiate with it and get to know it. And almost kind of, rather than see it as a dark enemy, you get to know your critic. You learn to laugh at it, and you kind of almost get to see how it plays out. And then it works for you in a very, very different way.
It's interesting. I feel like the whole world has like mental eczema. You know what eczema is?
Yes, yeah.
It's like your body is just like overproducing an immune response to a perceived threat that's not really there. Like even just like some...
Andy's the king of analogies, but this is a great one.
This is pushing the limits.
Wie geht's heute, Andy?
Oh, muy bien, mi esposa.
We have been practicing our Spanish and German, respectively, using the Babbel language learning app.
10 minutes a day.
10 minutes a day. Let's talk about that. That's insane.
That's 1/10 of the amount of mindless scrolling people do on average.
That goes by in a
10
jiffy.
minutes. Yeah. That's fine. 10 minutes, which is nothing.
Yeah. You can be having a conversation in whatever language you're working on in as little as 3 weeks. Can you think of a better way to be spending your time on your phone?
Hold on a second. No.
No. It's not a trick question. The answer is indeed no.
I wanted to put some thought to it.
What is cooler than being able to speak more than one language?
When I meet people who can speak multiple languages, they could be the most annoying people I've ever met. I immediately feel enamored.
No, same. I have more respect for them than I did before, because it shows like a culturedness, an open-mindedness, a curiosity, a work ethic.
It's a superpower.
It is.
They're like a very low-level superhero. It's like, imagine you just land on some planet and no one speaks. I am assuming there's other people on this planet for some reason, and no one speaks your language. And someone's like, hold on. I got this, and they just speak the language.
Yeah.
It's not that much different.
Yeah.
It's just an intergalactic language versus a language on Earth.
And I love how their lessons are created by 150 language experts versus AI. And above all, Babbel makes it fun. They're useful conversations when you do the lesson. It's stuff you would actually use. It's like, oh, I'm at the grocery store. I'm having a conversation with a friend. It's not too academic. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's really conversational. It's useful.
Yeah, it's like a game that I win every day.
Right now, get up to 55% off your subscription when you go to Babbel, BABBEL.com/Dear Shandy.
Again, that's babbel.com/Dear Shandy for up to 55% off your subscription.
Babbel, language for life.
So Charlene, we had an unexpected visitor a few days ago, Mr. Mouse.
Yes, Mr. Mouse.
And why did Mr. Mouse grace us with his presence?
Well, because we did a bad thing. So we love our Lomi. It's our electric countertop composter that turns food waste into dirt in a matter of hours with the push of a button. And the Lomi has changed our lives. Our garbage bags, when we take them out, are way lighter. We go through fewer of them, so that's less plastic waste. Obviously, in the long term, there's less waste in landfill turning into methane, which is a very harmful greenhouse gas. But we ran out of our Lomi Pod compost accelerator, which you put one tablet in with each.
Looks like an Alka-Seltzer.
And we ran out. We were in between days. It was just a couple days. Yeah. And it says a lot that when we weren't using a Lomi and all that food waste was instead going in the garbage, just sitting there. Just stewing. Stewing in its own juices.
Yeah.
We had a mouse. The first time we'd seen the mouse ever since we got the Lomi. Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
Super cute, but we don't necessarily need him here.
Yeah.
It's not just mice.
No.
It's roaches. It's bacteria. Why do you think it smells? It doesn't smell just because it decides, let's start smelling. There's like billions of bacteria eating it.
Let's start smelling.
Yeah,
it's
time. We've been in the garbage long enough.
And your plants love it.
Yes, because it is soil. It is soil that can go into your plants. And as a matter of fact, I've literally tapped out on my garden, my rooftop garden, because we don't have an in-ground garden. So there's a limited amount of soil I can keep putting in my plants. So I've had to resort to going outside. I have been Lomying all the trees on the block.
You're like...
I'm Johnny Lomi Sued.
And those garbage bags, when we take them out to the garbage, are about a quarter of the weight and they don't smell. And we take them out about a third as much.
And you know what I haven't had in many months?
What?
Is a nice, long, greasy streak going from our door to the garbage.
So whether you want to make a positive environmental impact or just grow a beautiful garden, Lomi is perfect for you.
Head to Lomi.com/Shandy and use promo code Shandy to get $50 off your Lomi.
That's $50 off when you head to Lomi, LOMI.com/Shandy and use promo code Shandy at checkout. And we thank Lomi for sponsoring this episode.
No, but I do think that that's what's happening, is that we are supposed to just be sort of like waking up at the sunrise, looking for some seeds or nuts or, maybe a little rabbit here and there if we're lucky, and then making a kid and getting a roof overhead and the whole thing. And anything above and beyond that creates neurosis. And I feel like, one of the reasons why therapy has come to the forefront and become so ubiquitous is because we are just going down this path of more and more complication, more and more inward thinking, more and more isolation, more neuroses. And I wonder sometimes if, based on this discussion of this 70% of these thoughts are like threat thoughts, negative thoughts, I wonder if one day therapy will be outstripped, like it won't be enough to fix the world's problems. Like we'll go too far down the hole and we will just be a cycle of trying to stop ourselves.
I feel like that what he just said says a lot about him.
It does.
It's a really interesting thought because that in itself is it's an anxious thought.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
Yeah, I've been around a long time. It's kind of,
Come at me.
But it's fascinating, isn't it? Because an anxious thought will always start off with what if.
Yeah.
It always start off with what if. And I guess my hope is that I do believe, look, the bottom line is we get in our own way. I could say that confidently with every client I work with, or every time I go and do a corporate talk or whatever the context might be, I watch people get in their own way. Now, don't get me wrong, look, difficult stuff happens to people all of the time. And people have difficult stories. And I acknowledge that. So it's not to minimize it in any way, shape or form. But I guess really most people it's, it's human nature. Most people want fixed, or they want sorted out, they want the remedy quickly, make me better. I often see clients get frustrated, when you give them the news, actually, no, I'm not going to fix you. I'll work with you and I'll push you and I'll get you there, but I'm not going to make it happen. So it's about helping people get out of their own way. And I guess really, if you simplified it down into a really simple common denominator, people get fixated on what's been, and they just will not let go of the difficult stuff that's happened, because they believe it shouldn't have happened, or they fixate on the not knowing. If you look at a definition of anxiety, it's an intolerance of uncertainty. So people get fixated on not knowing. I need to know. I must know. No, that's not how it is. We're not designed to know. We're designed, I don't want to sound too cliched or over mindfulness, but we're designed to be present. We're designed to be here, making the best of now.
So let's start at the very beginning then. If someone is listening to this and they either...
I thought you meant the interview.
Yeah, this is a warm-up. Are you ready to go? And action.
So in terms of self-therapy, how would one begin? Let's say someone's listening to this and, they've toyed with the idea of therapy, but the idea of finding the right therapist who costs the right amount, who they feel connected with, is just too daunting. It's not accessible to them. Or maybe they're even in therapy, but, there's all the days in between their sessions.
Yeah.
How, I know this, of course, you wrote a whole book on it. It's, how can I ask you this? But how would one start?
I mean, in the book, what I've done is I've broken it down into two parts. So the first half of the book is, look, but before you can go anywhere, you need to understand who you are. You need to really have a truthful, honest look at yourself, because we all deliver the polished, rehearsed. We all deliver the version of us that we want the world to see. That, we go on Instagram every day and we see that. That's kind of how we're hardwired at the moment. Let's deliver the version I think is acceptable. But often that isn't a real version. Often the real versions of who we are come with a whole mixed bag of amazing, brilliant stuff. But it also comes with stuff that's difficult. It comes with fear, anxiety, loneliness, rejection. We all come with stories. And I think everyone clings to the good stuff. Everybody wants the good emotions, the feel-good moments, the highs, but nobody wants to go near the darker stuff, when actually the darker stuff is your guiding point. That's the stuff that's trying to teach you the whole time. It's trying to guide you. That's the stuff that's trying to get you to that point of balance. So I guess in therapy, what I teach people to do is, go back and go over your story. Look at the difficult parts of your story. It's kind of almost like doing a jigsaw. I try and get clients to think about, how does your story help you understand who you are today? For those moments when you get angry when somebody talks over you, for those moments when you get really upset when someone undermines you, you need to understand why that happens to you and why you're triggered. Because most of our everyday stuff is never, I'd say probably in the majority of cases, when we get upset in everyday life, often it's never really about what's going on in the here and now. It's often triggering old stuff that we haven't resolved.
Right.
So you map it together, and I think then you can almost see relief. In therapy, you see in relief where people think, oh God, yeah, I get it now. So it's kind of almost like you need that coin to drop where they say, okay, this is why I struggle. So it's kind of like, okay. So, and that would make the person be more, I guess, more self-accepting and more self-compassionate when they see, actually, most of this wasn't your fault.
A quick question though. So the first half of the book is around that, that self-exploration.
Yeah.
Which can be very challenging for a lot of people, especially to have objectivity.
Yeah.
Do you think that there are any personality types that might struggle with this more than others?
Well, look, I make it really clear in the book. If it's overwhelming or it's too big, look, let's be honest, there are people who will need individual support. And my hope is that the book moves them in that direction. So I say very clearly, if you're overwhelmed or it feels too big to manage independently, or even with a friend, then you get professional help. That's a non-negotiable. But I guess, look, if we personalize stuff, which I think we all do, if I take my past personally, then I become the victim. When actually the difficult parts of my past, I was bullied and there was a lot of difficult stuff happened, but actually it was never really personal. It was just I grew up in a culture where there was a lack of understanding. And there was a lack of awareness. So that didn't mean that it was personal against me. It just meant that I grew up in circumstances where it was difficult for difference to be tolerated. That wasn't personal. The fact that I grew up with a lot of violence and trauma around me, that wasn't personal. It just happened to be my circumstances. But when we personalize it, then we fall into being the victim. Whereas actually, when you're able to step out of it and take it less personally, even though it feels very personal because it's your stuff and it hurts and it feels difficult, when you're able to kind of depersonalize it a little bit and stand back and think, but a lot of this wasn't my fault, particularly the early stuff. We move in the opposite direction. When we get into the adult stuff, we say, yeah, but you're not the kid anymore. So if we're still dealing with the childhood stuff as an adult and taking no responsibility, then the job becomes, but now's the time to take responsibility. So it's a kind of bordering act.
Yeah, I mean, because I can't help but think, and maybe this is the negative Nancy in me, that there are people out there who don't take responsibility and who tend to, play the victim. And I just can't help but wonder if that kind of person would not be capable of.
I don't think they seek therapy, or they laugh at it.
Absolutely. If I meet people who are resistant and they think, oh, this is bullshit, or this is rubbish, or this is all psychobabble, because look, I sort of get that, because there's a lot of, let's be honest about it, there's a lot of fluff out there. And there's a lot of fairy dust, and that's not what I deliver, and it's not what I'm about. But I kind of think, even if someone's cynical or they reject it, I kind of think, well, that in itself is quite revealing. And actually, if I'm with somebody or I'm working with somebody and that's what I get at the beginning, and I sometimes do, it's a brilliant inroad, because you can work with the resistance. Because if they're going to resist therapy and they're going to resist something helpful, they'll be doing that in other parts of their life. So it's a really good inroad.
Okay, so question based on that. You talk about how in Ireland it's like, instead of how are you today, it's what's your story?
Yeah.
And
exactly.
I love that concept. And then you really roll with that. And it's about coming to terms with your story, writing out your story, reflecting on your story. If someone were to write out their story, and it really sounds like they are the victim of their story, like exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
Bad things were done to them. Is it automatic then that they're looking at it through the wrong lens?
No, absolutely. It's a really good point you're making. So I think, look, if it becomes clear that someone believes, okay, I've been victimized, I've been treated badly, life is unfair. Now, here's the reality. That might be true, because we know that awful things happen in life, and life can be unfair, and things happen that should never have happened. So you never ever take that away from someone. So if I'm working with somebody and they come with all of this stuff, my God, you've got to give them the right to air that and to express that and to get that out and to release that in some way, shape or form. But I guess what I'm interested in is, and I say this to every client, this is a non-negotiable. It's the only contract I ever have with a client. I often talk about the importance of reclaiming life. You have the option to stick with that narrative that I'm powerless, that I'm hopeless, that this is all terrible. You have the option to stay with that narrative, but I guess good therapy is about, or you can make a decision to reclaim your life and to salvage what you can from this. So my only contract with people is, I'll say at the beginning, look, I'm hopeful, because I see transition and transformations happen every single day of my career. So I'm hopeful that this can be better than it is today. And I mean that wholeheartedly. For most people, it is. It's going to be better than it is today. Things are going to improve for you. You are going to find a breakthrough. So my contract with my clients will be, I'm hopeful that that's going to happen. But all I ask of you at the beginning is that you allow me to hold on to the hope for now. And in this process that we're going to do together, I will hand over bits to you. And I've never once had a client reject that as a contract. Never.
In the second half of your book, I love this. It's about 10 very precise minutes a day. It's very intentional, these 10 minutes of self-therapy. And what I love about this is I think 10 minutes is doable. That's not too daunting.
No.
Do you mind giving a brief rundown of what those 10 minutes look like? A preview. Well,
this is kind of where the self-therapy part of it comes in, really. I mean, the first half is the kind of the foundational work, really. You could call it that. Second half is, okay, well, look, how do you therapy yourself through your day? Now, that doesn't mean that you're nasal gazing or you're introspective or you're suddenly analyzing the shit out of your life. I mean, that's not what it's about, but it's about actually how can you, because I was talking about crash landing into adulthood, but most people also crash land into their day. They get up, they're out of bed, straight on it. work, kids, commitments. They get to the end of the day, nothing's been dealt with, nothing's been processed. There's been no space. And I guess we just get entangled. If we're not creating space between what goes on in our lives and we're just not quieting the mind, then we're going to struggle. That is unquestionable. We will struggle as human beings if we're not creating space. So the 10 minutes was really about, because I felt that was workable for most people. You give people longer meditation programs for 30, 45 minutes a day, they'll drop out because they haven't got the time to do it. So I, consciously went for short bursts, and I broke it down into ready, steady, and reset. So the ready is getting ready for your day. The steady is the middle of the day when you might be wobbling or starting to digress off track a little bit. And the end of the day is the resetting. We carry so much stuff to bed. We carry so much unresolved stuff. Most clients I meet carry countless worries at the end of their day. So one example would be, for the end of the day section, I create a thing called worry time, which is often used in cognitive behavioral therapies. And it's like, okay, before you go to bed, list the 10, 15, 20 things that are really worrying you at the moment. And most people will do it in an instant. They'll go straight to it. No
right
problem.
There, ready to go.
Yeah, they're ready. It's kind of automatic. And interestingly, when you sit down and say, okay, let's look at the 20 worries, how many of these are directly in your control today? Most of the time it's one, most of the time none. So then the negotiation becomes, okay, what would it be like for you to accept that, okay, you don't have power control over this today. There isn't a decision today. There isn't an answer today. Would it be okay to park that worry? That doesn't mean we're avoiding it or running away from it, but would it be okay to park it and leave that be? So I guess then when you train people and you help them to do that, then they're not taking all of these worries to bed unprocessed. Then they're not sleeping properly because the subconscious will then start to try and process and deal with stuff. People then wake up exhausted because they haven't slept properly. So you're really teaching people the art of letting go more. I'm acknowledging the difficult stuff, but I'm not going to get fixated on it.
What about doing the inverse of that? Because what I've found in my life is I had a much easier time smelling the roses earlier in my life. I found it more difficult to sit with the good things and just be like, things are good in this area at least. Yeah. I find it much more difficult. Like it's an actual process, like work for me to even get to the point.
Just to take inventory.
Just to take inventory of the good things in my life and to really experience it. I remember distinctly, times, specific moments in my distant past where I would just sit there. I could be anywhere. I could be driving in a car. I could be walking in the street. I could be laying in bed. And I would just have this very present and tangible experience of sitting with the good things in my life and feeling it. Almost like a soundtrack was playing over it too. It was just perfect. And now I find it so difficult. I'm wondering if maybe not to take away from what you said, which I think that's fantastic, but what if you did the exact opposite? What if instead of focusing on the problems and which ones are in your control and whatnot, what about just taking inventory of all the really good things in your life that you may not be appreciating, like the sort of the shadow of what you're talking about?
He does talk about that in the book.
And I do. So I do. And I think that was a really important thing to do because you're spot on in what you say. It's really important to understand the mechanics of struggle and challenge, but it's also equally important to understand the mechanics of being more present and appreciating. And I talk about gratitude and why, we talk, gratitude's thrown around a lot as a phrase, but actually there's a real kind of neuroscientific evidence that actually being in a grateful state is quite good for the chemical state of your mind, and it helps neurotransmitters, and we produce chemicals that are helpful for our mood and our anxiety levels. So all of this stuff comes with, it's light and shade really. It's kind of, let's look at the difficult stuff, but actually also let's look at the value in some of what you've just described. And I think also what you said there about, God, the older you get, the older we all get, it becomes much more difficult. And I think we become more aware of the challenges, but I also think, and I could be wrong, I'm just hypothesizing here and correct me if I've got it wrong, but I think sometimes we can fear holding on to happiness, or we can almost worry about focusing that and enjoying that there because there's a fear that we may lose it.
Yeah, you got it. Ding, 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 ding.
You won.
But I hear this stuff every day of the week where it almost becomes impossible to enjoy or to enjoy the big moments because there's a fear of losing them.
Yeah, the mortality, I think, just starts creeping in. At least for me, mortality has become a very daily presence in my life, and it's not just about the fear of dying. Like that's very abstract and kind of obvious. Yeah. Everyone has that. It's the fear of losing, dying, happiness dying in bits. Yeah. That thing that I love now is going to be gone one day. This person that I love now is going to be gone one day. It's like, instead of appreciating it now, I find myself looking past their existence.
Absolutely. I mean, you probably heard of a guy, he's a great writer called Michael Singer. I don't know if you're aware of Michael Singer. He wrote that beautiful book, The Untethered Soul. And he talks often about that, it's our attachments to these things. We attach to the difficult stuff, but we also attach to the other stuff with the fear of losing them. And actually inadvertently, we just end up experiencing and not enjoying very much because we're just so fixated on trying to hold on to things, when actually the second book is 10 times happier, and I talk a lot about that, the getting in the way of our own happiness. It's it's kind of getting in the way of the natural flow of just allowing today to unfold. If today's an amazing day and you're on top of the world and things are going great, what would it be like just to allow that to be and experience it without conditions? No conditions around it. If it goes the other way and today's a bit of a shitstorm and things are difficult and it's full of challenges, that doesn't mean that it's wrong. It doesn't mean that it's a bad day. It just means, okay, this is the day that I'm dealing with today, and I will allow this to teach me, and I will allow myself to work with it rather than work against it. So all of this sometimes can feel quite counterintuitive because you're going in the opposite direction.
Right.
We want to fight back. We want to control it. Going back to the intolerance of uncertainty, we want to control everything when actually we don't have the control. That's the bottom line.
It feels like the best way to live is to be a Buddhist without being a Buddhist. Just take all the good things.
It helps.
Earthly pleasures, possessions, money, and Buddhist mentality. Can you have that? Is that possible?
Take all the good things, but also allow the bad things to be part of it as well, and the challenges. And maybe don't even label them good and bad. Maybe it's just they all become, okay, this is an experience today, and I'm working with it. And again, this is what good therapy, I think, is about. Therapy has to be the right type of talking. You're not there to ruminate and to tell your story over and over again, or just to be heard. It's way, way more than that. Good therapy has to be about, challenging, helping somebody understand the mechanics of their life. But outside of that, it's also about the decisions you make, the boundaries that you create, the people you surround yourself with, the habits that you create in your life. Good therapy for me it's a complete overhaul of your life and being able to take responsibility for that. Not expecting just a weekly chat to work it all out for you. Because it's like, no, it's got to be more than that. The weekly chat is just a part of the equation. You work hard. Certainly, if you come to me, you work hard in that weekly chat, but the majority of the work goes on then between what happens in the session. And that means that you take responsibility for your life and you think, okay, this is the stuff that's working. This is the stuff that ain't working. And that means being open to change.
It's like getting a postgraduate degree in yourself.
Yep.
I was cooking an analogy too, but yours is funnier.
Oh, you had a
Mine was that the weekly session is like a weekly workout. You work out all your muscles, and the whole point with working your muscles is that they continue to burn calories or whatever during the week when you're not working out, right? When you're resting.
That's not bad. Mine's better.
Yours is way better. Okay. So speaking of, therapy working for some people and maybe people ruminating, I'm really looking for a segue here. What advice would you give to someone who has tried talk therapy for years but has felt that they've had little result?
I mean, it's a great question, and I think you're with the wrong therapist. First of all.
Okay. Wow. We love a black and white answer.
Because look, the evidence with therapy is good. Let's be honest about it. The evidence is pretty decent. I'm not saying that it's a be all and end all. Some people might need a combination of therapy and medication. There's no right or wrong to that. And it's very often individual context. But I think if it ain't working and if you've been in therapy for years and you're not making breakthroughs, then you're not in good therapy for you. That doesn't mean that you're with a bad therapist.
Yeah.
It's not about laying responsibility on the therapist, but it's about stopping to think about, okay, is this the right relationship? Sometimes clients come to me and I think they're expecting a nice little cup of tea. And, my dad thinks that's it. My dad still says to me, what is it you do? He still doesn't understand. And I asked him the other week, I said, what is it you think I do? He said, oh, you He said, you talk to people and have a nice cup of tea with them. That's my dad's understanding of therapy.
Andy, I'm going to admit that my hair is a security blanket for me.
Yeah, a little bit for me too.
Yeah. We like having thick hair, healthy hair, all the things.
It's not necessary, but it is nice.
It is. And that's why we are such big fans of Nutrafol, which you've got right there in your hands.
My little buddy.
Yeah, you even travel with that. You don't travel with a bottle, but you put the pills in a little baggie that you travel with.
I don't put them in one baggie. It depends on the length of the trip.
Okay, pardon me. Sorry, in multiple baggies depending on the length of the trip.
As a matter of fact, half my medicine bag when I go through TSA is basically little baggies of Nutrafol.
Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement.
Clinically proven to improve hair growth, thickness, and visible scalp coverage.
Yeah, who doesn't want some of that, right?
Yeah.
Am I the only one?
Why
Like,
not?
I'm admitting
No, you're not
it.
the only one.
Okay.
I literally get inundated all day with hair growth ads. I'm not kidding you. Every day that goes by, at least a dozen new hair growth things hit me somewhere. And this is the #1 dermatologist recommended one of all in this sea, this morass of hair growth products. This is the #1 dermatologist recommended one.
Yeah. And Nutrafol works by targeting the 5 root causes of hair thinning, and those are, Andy?
Stress, hormones, environment, nutrition, and metabolism.
5. 5 out of 5. And I love how Nutrafol has 3 unique formulas for women at different stages in their life. I mean, because it's not one size fits all. They have their regular one, and then they have postpartum and menopause.
And then a clinical study, 86% of women reported improved hair growth after 6 months.
6 months. That's not bad.
This is very
For hair?
good. That's how long it takes hair to cycle.
Yeah.
I learned that.
To see different things in your hair. Yeah, that's the thing about hair products, hair growth stuff. 6 months.
Yeah.
And it's pretty impressive. 86% for a product like this? That's
86%. That's 43 out of 50 people.
That's pretty good.
21.5 out of 25 people.
Want to go even further with that, Andy?
That's the 10.75 out of 12.5 people. That's a happy 10.75 people.
So you can grow thicker, healthier hair and support our show by going to Nutrafol.com and entering promo code DearShandy to save $10 off your first month's subscription. This offer is only available to U.S. customers and for a limited time.
Plus free shipping on every order.
Again, that's $10 off at Nutrafol.com, Nutrafol.com, promo code DearShandy. So Andy, I have in my hands the best shave foam I have ever used in my life.
And look what I have in my hand, the Athena razor kit that comes with the razor, a spare blade,
Yes.
and the handy dandy holder that you just slap onto your wall.
Yeah,
this thing is, hold on, I'm going to eat it. I'm just going to eat it. I'm tired of this.
The super duper cute magnetic hook that sticks to your wall. And by the way, we have one in the upstairs shower. We keep this one as a prop for our ads, but we really do have another one, a black one. And it is stuck to the wall with this adorable magnetic hook. Why don't you show everyone, Andy? Just connects like so.
That is satisfying.
Hands free.
What would you pay for this box?
So add
$40?
I mean, I would have guessed that would be around $20.
Well, you're wrong. This whole thing can be yours for $10.
Amazing.
$10. What do you get for $10 anymore? Can't even get a drink for $10.
You can't get 2 lattes for $10.
And it makes your bathroom look better, not worse.
It honestly, our upstairs bathroom looks, I don't know, it looks more grown up.
It was what we needed. It was the missing element in that bathroom.
And I love that the blade itself has water activated serum with shea butter and hyaluronic acid. So, it's doing good things.
I mean, you've said that's the best shaving experience you've had.
Without a question. I am not kidding. I look forward to shaving. This is not something I've ever looked forward to in my life. I kid you not. I used that razor right before we recorded these ads.
So show your skin you care with the Athena Club Razor Kit.
Head to athenaclub.com and use code DearShandy to get 25% off your first order.
Again, that's athenaclub.com and use code DearShandy for 25% off.
Athena Club has also launched in Target stores nationwide, so be sure to check out the shaving aisle to buy their products in store in real life. Okay, so with the idea of playing therapist to yourself, maybe on the days in between, or let's say, like we said early on, maybe you just find it too daunting. You're just not taking that step. Let's say someone's having an anxious episode or they struggle with anxiety day to day. What advice would you give them?
it's so misunderstood, so most people try to think their way out of anxiety. They try to, when they're in anxious state, they try to use their brain to kind of try and resolve the problem for them. But when you're in an anxious state, particularly when you're in a kind of an acute anxious state, your body's in a state of alarm and a state of threat. And when the physical body's held in a state of threat, so if you hold anxiety in your chest, your throat, your tummy, and you're staying with it and you're stewing on it, then it will send a signal to the brain, okay, there's a problem. So the brain will stay in this hypervigilant state of, alert. And then, of course, the brain likes a story. It will try and make sense of why am I anxious? It will create a narrative. So then the thoughts start to come, one thought after another, and then suddenly many thoughts, and we feel overwhelmed. So one of the ways of short-circuiting that is to start with the physical body. Instead of trying to rationalize it or think your way out of it, I'll always say to people, okay, let's deactivate the sense of threat in the body initially. Let's just go to the part where you're feeling the anxiety. I teach people how to ground, and that's literally, they might use breath work. They might use focus on a sensation or a part of the body. So basically you're training the mind. All these neural pathways are highly actively working when they don't need to be. So you're really quietening the activity and the noise in the brain. And when you teach people how to deactivate the sense of threat in the body, then they allow another part of the brain, prefrontal cortex, which is more rational, measured. It won't work. When you're in a state of high alert, it won't operate because it thinks there's an emergency. This is not a time to be rational. But then when you deactivate the alarm through the body and it switches off, the prefrontal cortex will then activate and allow you to then think your way out of the situation or talk yourself down. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And the other important thing to say there as well is your instinct will be, this feeling is bad, it's wrong. I don't want it. I want to get rid of it. I want to push it away. You're going the opposite direction. So when the anxiety moves in, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, this is okay. Think of nieces or nephews, or if you were looking after younger kids, if they were highly anxious or distressed around you, I would imagine you wouldn't feel the need to say to them, go away. I don't want to help you.
Once in a while.
Well, maybe.
Yeah, mostly not.
But you wouldn't. Your instinct would be to go and comfort and help them. And I guess it's with our own anxiety, it's a bit like that. Rather than I don't want you, this is wrong, I shouldn't be feeling this. It's a kind of, all right, this is okay. I'm not going to run from this. I'm not going to fight it. I'm not going to work against it. It's uncomfortable, and I'm going to acknowledge that, but I'm not going to deny the experience. And then you sit with it, and not immediately for some people. When you give yourself permission to have the feeling, it can almost bring the anxiety down a few notches because there's relief.
It's interesting. You were talking about the grounding, and it's all my life people have said, take a deep breath. I'm generally an anxious person, so I've gotten that a lot. People have said, take a deep breath to me many times.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting. I always thought of that as a figure of speech until the last few years, when I actually know that just focusing on the breathing in a certain way actually takes you out of that moment. And I personally have discovered that the only way for me to reverse kind of that panic loop is to start with the rhythmic breathing and to relax every muscle in my body.
So that brings me to my question. Yeah. Very good. Do you have any actionable tips? So like you feel yourself panicking, you feel yourself in this heightened anxious state.
Yeah. So for some people, it's always a stop. That's the kind of non-negotiable. So you're stopping. So that's a non-negotiable in whatever way you can. If you're in a situation you just need to go out to the loo or just need to go somewhere private, then you do that. So you just allow yourself to stop. And then your next goal is to create space between what's going on in the overactive mind and what's actually happening. So to do that, it's almost, I describe it sometimes to clients, like think of it almost like stepping into a helicopter. And what you're going to do is you're going to allow yourself to almost step into that helicopter and pull back, so that rather than being immersed in the feeling, what you're going to do is you're going to be aware of it. So you're going to look down in on it and you're going to be, you're going to be aware of what's happening. So the next stage is then, the awareness of what you're feeling, whether it's panic or anxiety or dread, whatever the context might be. Then the next step is about allowing that to be. So being very, very conscious, you're not going to resist, you're not going to run, you're not going to push it away. It's uncomfortable, it's not a desired feeling, but actually you're going to allow it to be, because immediately then you're going to help deactivate the heightened emotional state. So when it comes to grounding then, I teach breath work a lot with clients, but interestingly, what we know is that some people don't like breath work. So they find the focus on the breath, particularly if they're panic, think, oh my God, if I think about my breath, I'm going to get more panic. So if breathing works, great, use it, because regulated breathing, I use it, you've heard the technique 4-5-8. So that's when you breathe in for 4, hold for 5, out for 8. So a really powerful technique. But what I'd say is if breathing doesn't work for you, don't panic about that, because what you can then do is, do something like, okay, bring your focus of attention to your hands. So just let the breath be, just let it do what it's going to do. And then you'll notice things like heat, tingling, sometimes cramps, sometimes they can feel quite soft. It'll vary. But then what you're doing is you're doing similar to what you're doing with regulated breathing. You're bringing point of focus to one area. So if you're not keen on the breathing thing, take it to a point of focus, your hands, your feet, or a body part, and you just bring focus to that area, and you will notice sensations coming up. And then the mind will go off and tell a story. And when you notice the mind's gone off to tell a story, you pull it back. It will go off again, you pull it back. And I guess really that's training the anxious mind to slow down. Because if you think of all of the neural pathway activities going on when you're anxious, every time you call it back and say, no, we're not doing that at the moment, you're then slowing down the neural pathway activity. And that's the goal scientifically, neuroscientifically. That's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to create a greater sense of order so that we quieten down all of the noise and the activity that's going on in the mind. What's
an unfortunate side effect of that is that I find that looking at my phone is a cheap trick to stop panic. And I hate it. Like I use it as a last resort. I'm just like, God damn it, I got to look at my phone. And I'll start looking at my phone and suddenly I'll get lost in my phone. I'll forget what I was panicked about.
My phone gives me more anxiety.
And it's not good, but it works sometimes.
There's a study coming out. This might be helpful, actually. The phone's probably not the best. There's a study coming out in a few weeks. And I heard Gabor Mate talking about this recently. Hasn't been published, but I think it's about to be published. They got a whole team of psychologists and neurologists and psychiatrists, all sorts of people to monitor elite athletes who were on a training course for a few days. And they were looking at their blood pressure, what was going on in their mind, their anxiety levels, cortisol. They were measuring all sorts of stuff with them. And they discovered that every 4 hours, there was an adverse situation going on with most of the athletes. So it was either blood pressure was going up a bit, stress levels were increasing, mood was dropping, and they were intrigued about these changes that were happening every 4 hours. So they went to the organizers of the event and they said, we're just really interested that we have noticed detrimental changes in most of the participants, but it was only happening every 4 hours.
Oh no, I know what's coming. I know what's coming.
So
they got the schedule and they said, what happens every 4 hours? And they said they have a break and they get their phone.
Oh,
God.
I mean, the phone does make me more anxious.
It makes me more anxious in my whole life, but in the moment, it can bring me down because all it is, it's a crux. It's a crutch. I mean, because you are taking your whole life into this one stupid little thing.
Absolutely.
You can get a hit of distraction from whatever you're worrying about, but you're paying for it in the long run because it's causing more damage over time. You're trading your future for your present as a fix. And it makes me, I physically feel disgusted with myself every time I look at the phone for the reason of getting out of the moment. I'm like, oh, I have to worry about this thing. I have to make a decision about this. Oh, I'm like feeling panicky, like my heart was racing. Oh, I'm going to do this. And I feel disgusted by myself. Which I know it's going to work.
Yeah, but replace it. It'll work. Yeah, it'll give you short-term distraction, but longer term, it feeds into other unhelpful patterns.
Cancer.
So I'd say replace it with something different. Replace it with something else more helpful.
Mm-hmm.
What do you got?
I mean, I got a lot. But what I'll do very often is if I've got a gap between clients or between interviews or whatever I'm doing, but what I'll do is I live quite close to a park. I've got my dog with me. I'll take him out for a walk. I'll grab a coffee. I'll take a walk around the park and I'll deliberately, no phone, no contact. I'll make that just about getting out and breaking it up. I'll then plan, okay, finish the end of the working day. What will I do? Okay, I'm going to go for a run this evening. It's a really nice day in London. I'll go for a run this evening. Make sure that's part of my day. So I've got much better, and I've learned this the hard way. My supervisor used to really challenge me about not scheduling. He challenged me years ago, and I was, one particular point, I was stressed and I had a lot going on. I was trying to do too many things. I was writing books, promoting books, doing talks, loving what I was doing, but actually too much at one time. And he said to me, where's the self-care stuff? And it was really interesting for me. And I kind of thought, don't really have a lot of time for that at the minute. And he said, what do you mean you haven't got time for that at the minute? He said, it's your job. And I said, no, I get it. And I believe in this stuff wholeheartedly. And he said, your self-care is your job. It is your work, because when you do that, he said, you then show up better for your clients, for your family, for the people in your life, and for the work that you do. And he said, none of that bullshit. Self-care is your job. This
That's
is my job and my yeah. So I know
it's selfish. It's selfish of you not to care about yourself more.
Yeah, but this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, the Irish Catholic shame voice in me would hear that sort of, oh no, get on with it. You know, don't worry. There are people. There are people worse off than you. You know, that whole Irish narrative plays out.
Yeah.
Where I would see it as selfish or self-indulgent, whereas actually, no, I've got much better. It's like, actually, no, this is a part of my job. And this enables me to do my job.
Wow. So speaking of jobs, I'm sort of changing the subject here. You had a former job for 10 years in palliative care.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah.
What was your, to me, that's like a very intense 10 years.
When I told Andy about this with your resume, he was like, oh, I have questions. What
was your biggest takeaway from that? And did you find it depressing for the most part, or inspiring? And how or in what ways did it possibly change your feelings about the end of life, about the end of your life?
It's a huge question, but it's an important question. I mean, I never ever found it depressing, which is interesting. Wow. Not once in the 10 years. It was never. I think people have that notion that when you're in an arena like that it's going to be awful, but actually all of life continues, you know, and good, you know, palliative care isn't about dying. It's about living whilst dying, you know, and so it was always about helping people to get the best from their life and stuff. But the interesting thing was, and look, every story was different, you know, everyone's story was, you know, everyone's narrative was different. And I guess when I was doing that work, I was doing it from a medical perspective, not psychology, even though 80% of the challenges are psychology. You're coming from a medical model, which is why I ended up going off to train as a psychotherapist, because I felt, I didn't feel I had the skills to do the job well. So that's actually what brought me down the kind of psychology route. So that's how I ended up doing what I do now. But I guess really, I was always struck by the importance of hope. I talk loads and loads in my work about the importance of hope. And what I realized was that even in the most awful, tragic circumstances, sometimes that, you know, hope was just a hugely important thing. And even if that was just kind of someone getting to go to the local park with their kid for the day and having a nice time with them, or it was just getting to go to the local coffee shop and do something nice, or, you know, make it to their son's wedding, or whatever the context might be. Hope was a really, really important ingredient for most people. And it really struck me about how important that is in everyday life generally, that, you know, we need hope. But it was also about, you know, you were constantly, you know, you could be, if I was working in a hospice, you know, you could be 3 o'clock in the morning and you were sat with somebody. Sometimes they could be your age, you know, with somebody your age group, and you're working with them, and you just end up having these conversations, and this automatic wisdom would just flow sometimes, because I guess when someone's faced with mortality, then they stop and they evaluate and they look at their lives, and they come up very, very, not all of the time, but very often with the wisdom about making the best of life. I noticed patterns, or I would never, ever hear people talk about how much money they earned, ever. Never heard people talk about how much they'd achieved, or their academic achievements, or their awards, or what they've done. I always was struck by people talking about time they'd spent with people, or holidays they'd had, or experiences, or maybe aspects of their work. But I really got struck by the fact, God, the things that matter aren't the things that we value. And I was really, really struck by that. If you look at how we're driven in life about achievement, success, blah, 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 very often what you'd hear is kind of, when it comes to it, actually that really doesn't matter that much. And that really was a huge wake-up call. So I'd go into work some days, and like everybody else, you know, you'd be thinking, oh God, I've got to do my car tax, and I'm changing my mortgage at the minute, and the dog needs to go to the vets. And so you'd be all kind of, you know, riled up by these list of everyday worries. And then I'd go into work, and I'd meet somebody, or I would be working with somebody who'd suddenly become more unwell. And then this kind of immediate wake up on perspective would come in, whereas like, actually, this is not important. This has just come to mind, so I'll share it. I remember I was working in a hospice many, many years ago, and I think it was like a Friday night or something. And I'd done a shift. And this particular shift, I think 7 people had died within that, which is very unusual for 7 people to have passed away on it. And I was in charge that day, and I was running the shift, and we had 7 people die during that. So that was not only dealing with the 7 people, but their families and stuff. And, it was really intense. Yeah. And I can remember driving home from work that evening, and I drove past a bar, and everyone was drunk, and, the music was playing really, really loud. And I noticed there were 4 guys on the road, and they were having a fight, and the police were there, and it was just crazy. And I had this moment where I wanted to stop the car, and I wanted to get out and say, if you've seen what I've seen today, you wouldn't be doing this.
So true.
To be fair and to be honest, I think very often, and I'm sure anyone who works in this arena, I think you often receive more than you give when you work in those areas. Any of these things, when you're involved in people's lives, whether it's in telling their story or whether working with them when they're coming to the end of their life, that's a privilege to be, for someone to trust you in that moment, but actually to be alongside them. Unless you're unconscious, you can't do that work and not be impacted. The key takeaways were really about, really stopping in your everyday life. Perspective, not being afraid to look at yourself, but also not being afraid to take responsibility for your life and the decisions you're making and how you live it. Because I guess, you're reminded constantly in these arenas that, we aren't here, we aren't here for a long time. We're here for a period, and living that life fully as much as we can and making it matter, making it driven by purpose and value and all of these things. That is important. And relationships, and connection, all of these things that we sometimes neglect, they are so more important, I think, than we realize. And we just lose sight of it in the everyday craziness of our lives. I often feel really honored and privileged that I got that time in my life and I got that experiences, because it does hopefully shape my work in a very positive way. I hope.
You should write a movie. I mean, just the nun and the lords alone you could just build off that.
Yeah. Okay, Owen O'Kane, thank you so much for spending.
Thank you.
And we're just so grateful that you could make time for us today.
Thank you. And I've really genuinely enjoyed every second of this conversation. It's been lovely. Thank you for making me so welcome, because it's always quite daunting when you come on a new podcast or a new show and stuff. It's always like, oh God, I hope, because you're always thinking about the dynamic and, you want it to go well. And thank you for making it really easy and a lovely conversation. So thank you.
Oh,
you made it easy for us. Thank you so much. Have a
You're
great
very
rest
welcome.
of your day.
Thank you.
Okay.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Ooh.
Oh man, those are the kind of talks that when they end, I'm sad.
Oh, Andy, that's so sweet. I could tell the two of you connected.
We did. I had so many. I didn't scratch the surface of where I wanted to go. I didn't think it was appropriate for the podcast. I think it's appropriate for sitting back with some Irish whiskey.
Yeah. Or tea.
Yeah. Or tea.
Yeah.
Or tea.
No, it became a time constraint towards the end. But yeah, I felt like you had some existential.
I did. I had so many. And the Irish, as I was touching on, the Irish really, they are the masters of existentialism. I mean, the French, they say the French, I know, you got your Sartre and your Camus, but when it really comes to the average person in the country being existentialist, I think Ireland wins.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
I think he has such a neat perspective on happiness in general. I mean, he's written books on it. Like literally his books are called 10 Times Happier and 10 to Zen. You can really tell that his opinions, his thoughts, his perspectives are colored by something. Mm-hmm. I mean, he had a really hard first several chapters of his life.
Yeah. And then he went into work with something very hard that he turned into roses for his development.
Mm-hmm. You were really into his Catholic nun therapist story.
Oh my God, how funny was that? How funny is that? He literally is going to come out of the closet to a therapist, and it's a nun.
And a Catholic nun, the religion that that has inflicted him with all this shame in the first place.
The worst person he can imagine to come out to. And then he goes to Lourdes and to de-gay himself. And he's got these 2 hot, muscular guys dunking him in water. I could just imagine like the water's like glisten, it's like rolling off their big muscled shoulders. And you hear like REO Speedwagon or something. It's like, and I can't fight that feeling anymore. And obviously slow motion.
Obviously. I don't know if I would have found that as funny. Like, I would have found it more like sad, I guess. But you're right. It is funny.
It's hilarious.
Yeah. What is comedy again?
Tragedy plus time.
Yeah. Tragedy plus time.
Yeah. And it's look,
who's laughing now? I mean, he's living his best life.
Yeah, no harm done.
Yeah.
All those things ended up being good.
Yes.
So we can laugh at them now.
Yeah.
Amazing. Maybe the funniest thing I've ever heard in the life story of one of our guests since we started this podcast.
No, you're right. It is. It's sheer comedy.
It's almost so funny. It's like if you wrote that, you'd be like, that's a little hacky. Like, take it down. Yeah. Just
You've
make it a little more nuanced. A little more nuanced.
Yeah.
Too obvious.
That's why he has to make a movie.
Has to. Just based around that.
Yeah.
That's how a lot of movies are made. It's just like you smell something and you're like, I want to make a movie based on that. Just work off that smell.
Yeah.
That's a bad example. I don't think any movie's ever been made off of smell.
Okay.
You got to be a great director. You'd be like, I envision fields of French lavender.
It was interesting, his perspective on therapy being a temporary thing, because I feel like depending on who you talk to, and maybe this is a more American perspective, I don't know if everyone would see it that way over here. The idea that, 5 years is like too short a time or something. It's like the idea that you want to get to the point where you don't need the person anymore. Because I think a lot of people see therapy that way, but I also think some people, it's just like, I have a therapist and this is just, It's ongoing.
Well, I guess
like exercise.
It's like comparing it to, I think I made an example about getting a postgraduate degree in yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, you do end the degree and go out to the workforce at some point. You're not going to be in school forever.
Yeah.
So the idea is you teach a man to fish. You eventually learn how to fish, and there will be some days where you don't catch fish.
Yeah.
But you know how to fish now. So you know how to handle those days.
Yeah.
Just do better the next day. There'll be more fish.
And maybe when you can't remember how to fish, or you are fishing but there's no fish to be found, then you can call up your therapist that you haven't spoken to in a while and be like, oh, hey.
Yeah. Well, he's no longer your therapist. Now he's like a fishing instructor.
Fully the fisherman.
Or is it fly fishing? I always wanted to do that.
Yeah, me too. It looks cool.
Yeah.
We should do that. What's stopping us?
We should go fly fishing.
We need to live our lives. I feel motivated and inspired.
More fly fishing.
Well, that was delightful. Again, the book is How to Be Your Own Therapist by Owen O'Kane. It was a good one. I love watching you connect with certain guests.
I like it too.
It doesn't always happen.
Doesn't always happen.
I could tell that you guys had there was something.
It happened.
It was cute. Okay, if you enjoyed what you heard today, you know what we will ask of you, and that is to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, follow us on Instagram, and
TikTok,
leave us Apple and
Spotify
podcast ratings and reviews. Tell your friends, and generally do all the things you would do to support a podcast you enjoy. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Dear Shandy. Bye-bye.